So I've been thinking about, I guess, this idea that God is self-causal because I've heard quite a few, I guess, issues with it from some people. Most notably, my teacher in junior year of high school used to tell me that people say God is self-causal, but I have absolutely zero content as to what that means, what that actually, how that works, how can something cause itself? It's not intuitive, it doesn't make sense, and he thought of it as kind of a cop-out answer. And the other, I guess, property you could attribute to God besides self-causality is non-causality. But at least in my opinion, I think self-causality is more consistent with our notions of causation than non-causality. One definitely sounds better and feels more correct than the other. Because to say that something has an effect without a cause just goes completely against everything. To say something is caused by itself, at least you can identify a cause and an effect. You have both of them, they're just in the same thing, in the same event, I guess. Non-causality just doesn't make sense. And so I tend to lean towards that, but it still is kind of weird. I mean, it still doesn't really make sense. It just makes more sense than the other one. But I think one thing you can do to maybe put it into perspective better and figure out what that really looks like, it's helpful to maybe view the world as we're currently living in it in a different way than we usually do. And I'm going to refer largely to Alfred North Whitehead's Process and Reality and his ideas, but I'm not going to go too deep into them, one, because I don't feel I'm qualified to, but also I kind of just want to focus on this one bit that pertains to this idea of self-causality in God and in the world as we know it, which was what I was kind of going to get to. I think that if we reframe our view of time and matter and activity, I guess is a better word, in the universe, the thing that the physical world really deals with is activity more than just physical static substance. Because when you talk about activity has properties, and it also includes in it the notion of time, because an event or an activity implies that there's a duration. But when you just view the world as stuff, it's really just properties, and it doesn't include the duration in it. And so now you're left with, where does that come from? Why is there activity at all if there's just stuff? Why can't there just be stuff? So I think viewing the world as a series of events rather than as a collection of substance is just a better, more consistent way to view the world. Complete way to view the world. That's the word I was looking for. Now, when we look at the world like that, we kind of fall into this question of what is like the quantum of an event. And it's funny I use the word quantum because I would imagine that a physicist would answer that by saying that the quantum of an event is a quantum event of some sort. And if that is the viewpoint in physics, then that's great, but I really don't, again, feel like I'm qualified enough to even talk about any of that. But what I do feel I can talk about at least is the idea of the Planck time in physics, And I'm not like I'm just using it more so as a concept than as an exact like mathematical thing, mathematical object. But treating the Planck time as a concept, this idea that there is the smallest divisibility of time exists in the universe. There is a speed of time in a way, because we can break it down into these little quanta. And that brings us to the question of, if each quantum of time transitions to the next, in each moment there is a universe that's identifiable with that slice of time. And you can take like a snapshot of the entire universe as it is in one segment of time, one quantum, and then in the next quantum of time. And the fact is that it's going to be different. It's impossible that anything remains the same in that transition. The very foundation of physics hinges upon this idea of vibration and oscillation. Everything at a fundamental level is fluid. It's never still and static. It's always physically vibrating in a sense. And just that means that in every snapshot that we take of the universe in that quantum of time, it's going to look different. And this leads to a whole question. What happens in that transition? How can something change, suddenly become different from one quantum to the next? We say, of course, that whatever quantum precedes that one is the prerequisite, and it contains the cause of the next slice of time, which would in turn be the effect. But it doesn't account for how it's possible that there's seemingly a gap where things suddenly go from being one way to being another way in the smallest unit of time. It doesn't really compute as to how something can cross that gap, that abstract gap. And of course there are a lot of ways you could answer this, but the way that Alfred North Whitehead kind of approached this is saying that in each of these increments of time, there is a event that occurs that is self-causal, but it's not self-determinate. It's determined by its past, essentially. It's influenced by its causes, its respective causes, and yet it is self-causal. And the causes are only inherited in the determination of the effect, which he argues is different than the cause of it, because fundamentally the universe works as a process. And so there is a sequence of I guess you can say that there are steps that need to be taken in each transition from one increment of time to the other. Sorry, terrible English. And this process he lays out in very, very, very complex detail that I can't even bring myself to judge properly, because some of it is just so hard to grasp. But the thing that I'm really trying to get at, and the thing that I think he illuminates very well is the idea that there has to be some notion of self-causality in the universe to account for this moment where everything is one way and suddenly it's a whole other thing. It's a new thing. And in order for something to be new, there needs to be a sort of creative impulse. And that creative impulse is self-causality. It leaves room for change, fundamentally. And, I'm sure there is a way to argue that you can account for this gap in other ways. I'm sure of it. But I think that this does a good job of it, and I'm inclined to believe it. And the reason why I even brought up God in the first place is because this all, I think, kind of makes a little more clear what you would mean when you say that God is self-causal. I know I've gone all this way just talking about how the world works and not God, but I'm going to get to the point now. When we think of a world influenced by its past and yet self-causal, we see a world like ours, one that is consistent with past events. It follows cause and effect just as you'd expect it to. But then, of course, when you get to the origin of the universe, when you go all the way back to the first thing that ever happened, it becomes impossible to conceive of anything that makes sense with what we observe in the reality we actually experience today. So it's very hard to understand that. But the thing is, at the origin of the universe, it works fundamentally the same as it does now. The only difference is it's not preconditioned by anything. There's a self-causal event that's preconditioned by nothing. And what does that mean? Well, to me, even leaving the word God out of it, this is a thing with infinite potential. It carries infinite potential with it. And in its self-causality, it also becomes self-determinate. And that's the thing about all the other, I'm just going to call them entities, events, is they are self-causal but not self-determined because they're influenced by their past. But God is the only event that was self-causal and self-determinate because it was not preconditioned by anything. And I think looking at it this way makes a decent amount of sense. It still leaves a lot of unanswered questions about God and what that really means, but what it fundamentally answers is maybe self-causality does make sense, and it is possible. The only difference is that God is just not God is the only thing that is self-determinate. And yeah, I guess that's my spiel. Just wanted to kind of get my thoughts out there. I'd love to hear other thoughts on this, though, because I'm very curious, and I need some more input from other people. So yeah, thanks for watching.